memory scenes to the stories that last forever, love letters to history we remember eternally.
When American women gained the right to vote in 1920, it didn't just change elections, it changed the White House. Suddenly, the president's wife wasn't just hosting state dinners and pouring tea. She was part of a brand new voting bloc, which comprised half of the population.
And over the next 50 years, first ladies began to shape politics, public opinion, and even international diplomacy while defending their husbands through any type of controversy, even one that became the biggest political scandal in American history.
Welcome to Love Letters to History, where two best friends dig into the stories of the women behind the commanders in chief.
I'm Liz, here for the personalities, the drama, and the moments history forgot to mention.
And I'm Emily, your historian friend full of fun facts.
Last episode, we covered the first ladies from Martha Washington all the way through Edith Wilson, including the beginnings of the position through the suffrage movement. We also discovered which first ladies could drink, which ones saw the devil in liquid spirits, and which ones suffered unimaginable grief and loss.
Today, we're picking up where our last episode left off, right after suffrage, and traveling through the Roaring Twenties, the Great Depression, World War II, an assassination, and a presidential resignation, all of which changed the course of our relatively new nation. We're entering the modern First Lady era, where the role becomes far more public and political instead of social hostess quietly whispering more than sweet nothings to her husband. Hello, husband.
Yeah, baby.
Our cocktail today is the Camelot cocktail, named after the moniker given to the Kennedy presidency. It includes gin, elderflower liqueur, lemon juice, and champagne. A French 75 with elderflower or the French 77.
But the Camelot name paired with champagne twist makes it more elegant, sparkly, and glamorous.
Which feels very appropriate for us and for the mid century Washington leading ladies.
So after the suffrage movement, we see first ladies having to embrace their public role while still being unapologetically themselves, which I still find difficult at times. We begin with a woman who engineered her husband's business success and championed her husband throughout his short life. All right, Elizabeth, let's get started. The first lady to celebrate suffrage was
Dun, 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 dun.
Florence Harding.
Woo!
I have to say, I am completely impressed with Florence Harding. Before prepping this episode, I knew absolutely nothing about her, and now I kind of love her. She was born in Ohio into a well to do family, but her life did not follow the neat, proper path people expected. At just 20 years old, she eloped with her first husband, Henry DeWolf, nicknamed Pete, against her family's wishes.
I'm guessing it didn't go well.
Not at all. He struggled with alcoholism, couldn't hold a steady job, and would disappear for weeks at a time, leaving Florence by herself to raise their young son. The marriage lasted about 6 years before she essentially said, I'm done, and walked away.
Well, in that era, that was real bold.
Very bold. And it gets better. A few years later, in 1891, again going against her father's wishes, she falls for a man with big dreams, but not a lot of money.
Sorry, Dad.
Sorry. Sorry, not sorry, because she went after Mr. Warren G. Harding. He owned a small newspaper called the Marion Star, and Florence didn't just support him, she helped build it. She managed circulation, handled business decisions, and basically turned it into a successful operation.
She wasn't just a future political wife, she was a business partner.
Exactly, and you can really see the difference between first husband and second husband. They had an actual partnership going, her and Warren, and the two of them love to travel, and these two girls, we love to travel, so we can definitely relate to that. They saw the world, embraced new experiences, and developed this shared sense of curiosity and perspective, which honestly just makes me love her even more.
Let's fast forward to 1920. After years of political climbing, he runs for president, and Florence was essential in running the campaign.
Here's the moment I love. The 19th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution is ratified that August, meaning Florence becomes one of the first women in American history able to vote in a presidential election.
You go, girl.
And obviously, she votes for her own husband. I mean, completely iconic. And of course, he wins.
Do you think they had the write-in ballots, or did they have the machines at that point? Remember those machines when we were younger that you pulled and the curtain closed and then you
Yeah.
pulled again and then the ticket came out?
I wonder what kind they had. I'm guessing just regular pencil and paper at that time.
Shove it in a box? I don't know.
Yeah, we'll have to look that one up.
The Hardings quickly became incredibly popular, and Florence earned the nickname the Duchess. Yet, despite that royal title, she was considered a model for the modern First Lady. The White House had been closed to the public after Woodrow Wilson's health issues and World War I. She encouraged Warren to reopen the White House grounds to the public because, in her mind, the president worked for the people. She was also deeply committed to supporting disabled veterans returning from the battlefields. She called them my boys and visited hospitals and made sure they weren't forgotten. This woman was doing God's work, Elizabeth.
I love that. Spreading the light. She
Yes.
served as honorary national chairwoman of the Girl Scouts of the USA, promoting independence and leadership for young women, another very forward thinking move. And she was an animal lover, which, same. Her dog,
Exactly.
Laddie Boy, became something of a celebrity. He attended events, appeared in the press. Honestly, he had better PR than most politicians.
The Airedale Terrier really did. While he wasn't the first White House pet, he was the first to achieve celebrity status. He even has his own Wikipedia page. And I'm guessing he would have had an Instagram if they were alive today.
Absolutely. Sips to that poor pup. He looks so sweet. The last chapter of their time together is both grand and heartbreaking. In 1923, the Hardings set out on a cross country voyage of understanding, a massive train tour across the US, then up through Canada and into Alaska.
Amazing. But Liz, they never finished it.
No, they didn't. Unfortunately, Warren Harding suddenly becomes ill and dies at just 57 years old, most likely from a massive heart attack. This was the era when men would just drop dead from that widowmaker because they didn't keep up with heart health and
All that bacon.
exactly. Florence has to do the unthinkable. She travels back across the country with his body so he can lie in state at the Capitol. And then she continues on to Ohio for burial, all while she herself is seriously ill.
Jeez. She had apparently been battling chronic kidney disease for years. That surely had to have made her job as First Lady way more difficult, but no one noticed. And just 15 months after her President Harding's death, she passes away too. They are both laid to rest in Ohio and later honored with a beautiful Greek style memorial dedicated by President Herbert Hoover.
Truly, she didn't just stand beside history. She helped shape it quietly, strategically, and completely on her own terms. Sips for one strong woman who had to find the torch earlier than expected to her successor.
She handed that torch to Grace Goodhue, who was one heck of a stylish, inspirational, intelligent, and loving woman. She was the first lady with a bachelor's degree and also the first with an honorary doctorate of law. Before she ever stepped foot into the White House, she was a teacher at the Clark School for the Deaf, where she worked closely with deaf and hard of hearing children. That wasn't just a job for her, it was a lifelong passion. She later married lawyer Calvin Coolidge, and the two had very different personalities. He was famously quiet and went by Silent Cal, but she was warm, outgoing, and full of energy.
Another opposites attract again, I would say.
Exactly. Together, they had two sons, and Grace managed the demands of family life while also supporting Calvin's growing political career, traveling frequently to Boston when he was lieutenant governor of Massachusetts. Then, when Calvin became vice president, Grace moved with him to Washington. And not long after, everything changed because in 1923, President Warren G. Harding suddenly dies on that train, and Calvin Coolidge is sworn in almost overnight.
And Grace, she steps right into the role of First Lady with a natural ease. She understood immediately that the position mattered, not just politically, but emotionally for the country. And she really did bring something the White House needed at that moment, which was warmth. Because let's be honest, Silent Cal was not exactly hosting lively dinner parties.
Yeah, that wasn't his style. But he was worried about their public persona since he bought outfits for the both of them. He especially wanted to accentuate her good looks, and I do think she's one of the prettier ones. I think it's rather nice for a president to not want his first lady to just fade into the background.
Absolutely. So Grace becomes the energy of the White House. She hosts family events like the Easter egg roll, invites performers like Rachmaninoff, and celebrities like Mary Pickford. She attends Major League Baseball games. She made the presidency and the position of First Lady feel human again.
Which was good. She also had this incredible ability to connect with people. Her staff loved her, the public loved her. She just had that presence. She went back to her roots in working with the hearing impaired when she hosted Helen Keller in 1926. If you could see the pictures, Helen held the hand over Grace's mouth while she spoke. She really connected with people from all walks of life.
I absolutely love this picture. Grace's story also takes a heartbreaking turn while they're in the White House. Their younger son, Calvin Jr., develops a blister after playing tennis on the White House courts. It becomes infected, turns into septicemia, and within days, he passes away.
And he was only 16, y'all.
16. His funeral is held in the White House, which is just unimaginable. That level of grief in such a public space, and it deeply affects both of them, especially Calvin, who never fully recovers emotionally.
But Grace, though, she kept moving forward. She brings many unusual pets into the home, including Rebecca the raccoon. I love this. Fun fact, since Grace was from Mississippi, many Southerners would send animals for the first family to eat at Thanksgiving because you know Southerners love roadkill. Grace did not think raccoon sounded appetizing, so she put a leash on it instead.
Well, that's one way to take care of the problem. Then she throws herself into restoring the White House, bringing it back to a more traditional colonial style and returning historic furniture that had been removed and put into the attic over the years. During that time, Congress actually passes a resolution allowing the White House to accept donations of historical furnishings and artwork, helping preserve it as a national symbol, not just a residence.
Which is a subtle but important shift. She helped shape the White House into something that reflects American history and not just whoever happened to be living there. But after they leave the White House, Calvin dies of a heart attack in 1933 and Grace becomes a widow. But her story doesn't end there.
Nope, not even close. She lives more than 20 years longer and continues advocating for deaf and hard of hearing individuals, staying connected to the work that defined her before she was ever First Lady. She didn't lose herself in the role, she owned that role. I will say, if I had a raccoon, I'd probably put a leash on it too.
I know. Oh, I would love a little raccoon with their little
And they got
fingers.
those little hands. They're so cute. Okay.
At least she didn't let widowhood drag her down.
Exactly. Yeah, sips to her.
Next is Lou Hoover, and she was one of those first ladies who was even more ahead of her time than the ones before her. She was born in Iowa, but moved to California as a child, and that's really where her love of the outdoors took roots. She grew up hiking, camping, exploring, and carried that adventurous spirit with her for the rest of her life. It was at Stanford University where she studied geology, which, by the way, she was the first woman to get that degree there. But she met her future husband there, Herbert Hoover.
Nice. Sips for those rocks. And from there, her life just takes off. She wasn't just well educated, she was wildly accomplished. She spoke multiple languages, including Chinese and Latin, and she and Herbert traveled all over the world, often in pretty rugged conditions.
Wow, this was not a stay at home and host teas kind of woman, although that's totally my jam.
Absolutely. I'm all about the quiet life nowadays. She was far from that, though. She was a huge advocate for women's physical fitness. pushing for better facilities, more opportunities, and even more female coaches in athletics. She wanted all women to be self reliant.
And she also served as president of the Girl Scouts twice. And during her second term, the organization developed a national plan for girls to bake and sell cookies as a fundraiser.
That's right. If you've ever demolished a box of Thin Mints in one sitting, I might be guilty of that. Just know Lou Hoover had a hand in that legacy. Truly a woman of the people, I would say.
I'm personally a tag along girl, but hey, but here's a fun fact for you, Liz, my favorite Christmas loving co host. A four-alarm fire erupted in the West Wing on Christmas Eve 1929. The next Christmas, Lou gave toy fire trucks made of heavy cast metal to all visitors in memory of the event. She also made history as the first lady to give a radio broadcast, bringing her voice directly into American homes. But interestingly, she was not a fan of the press.
And honestly, you can kind of understand why. She faced intense criticism, especially from Southern newspapers, after inviting the wife of an African American congressman to tea at the White House.
Which should have been completely normal, but at the time, it was seen as controversial. This also reminds me of Betty White. She hosted a radio show way back when there was no TV, and she had made arrangements for this African American guy, and I don't remember his name, to sing and dance on the show. And the producers were like, no. So she kind of quit the show.
Wow. Such a different time back then. But,
Yeah,
thanks to those women, we're probably sitting here recording podcasts because they took those first steps to get their voices out there. So, just a side
exactly.
note, I love that. Instead of backing down, she quietly stood her ground, which tells you a lot about her character. Unfortunately, her time in the White House coincided with the beginning of the Great Depression, which meant that no matter what she did, no matter how progressive or forward thinking, everything was foreshadowed by economic collapse.
Which is one of those moments in history where even capable, driven people get buried under the weight of circumstances. Sips for that Black Tuesday and what it meant for America and those who weathered the storm with nothing. Can you imagine? We think we're going through hard times now, but it was way, way, way worse back then.
Yeah, absolutely. So be grateful for what we have now. Lou later passed away in 1944 from a heart attack, but her legacy, it's not defined by the crisis she lived through. It's defined by how far ahead of her time she truly was.
Now, drum roll, we arrive at the woman who permanently changed what it meant to be First Lady. Before Eleanor Roosevelt, most First Ladies focused primarily on social duties, hosting, entertaining, supporting from the background.
But Eleanor walked in and said,
Hold my beer?
no, she said we're doing more than what is expected. She transformed the role into a platform. She held regular press conferences and only allowed female reporters to attend, which forced newspapers to hire women just to cover her.
That is so cool, but also such a subtle power move and kind of brilliant. She wrote a daily newspaper column for almost 30 years titled My Day, sharing her thoughts, observations, and advocacy directly with the public. Her wisdom was limitless. And here's a quote: of one thing I am sure, in order to be useful, we must stand for the things we feel are right, and we must work for those things wherever we find ourselves. And she clearly lived that message. She also traveled constantly in order to live by that statement. She visited coal mines, schools, military bases, and saw firsthand just how Americans were actually living.
Right. So she didn't just sit in the White House. She ventured throughout the country and brought those stories back with her. And she used that knowledge to advocate for civil rights, labor protections, and greater political participation for women. But let's be clear, she didn't always agree with her husband, Franklin D. Roosevelt.
Not at all, but at least she stood her ground and pushed him, publicly and privately. But she also played the proper role of First Lady. And, I have to bring the British into it. But in 1939, she and FDR hosted the parents of Queen Elizabeth II, King George VI and the Queen Mother Elizabeth. They were the first reigning British monarchs to visit the U.S. The royals celebrated a continued alliance at the beginning of World War II by dining on hot dogs at a real American picnic.
There's also a deeply personal part of Eleanor Roosevelt's life that historians still talk about today, and that was her relationship with journalist Lorena Hickok, often called Hick for short.
Hick was covering the Roosevelt administration because remember, only women were allowed in the press room when they first met, and the two women became incredibly close very quickly. They wrote each other thousands of letters.
And some of those letters are intense, emotional, intimate, sometimes romantic in tone. At one point, Eleanor writes, I want to put my arms around you and kiss you.
Ooh, steamy, which has led historians to debate the nature of their relationship, whether it was romantic, physical, or a deeply emotional partnership.
But regardless of whatever label you want to put on their relationship, what's undeniable is this. Hick was one of the most important people in Eleanor's life. And in a time when women were expected to exist only within very narrow roles, that kind of connection was very bold. Her personal relationships add another layer to Eleanor, not just politically groundbreaking, but she was also personally complex, deeply human, quietly rebellious.
But then, after FDR dies, you might expect her to have stepped back. But she does the complete opposite. President Harry S. Truman appoints her to the United Nations, where she helps draft the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, a document that becomes one of the most important statements of human rights in modern history. So the ever revealed Eleanor didn't just refine the role of First Lady.
Not at all. She redefined what a woman in power could do, and she never went back to being quiet.
In an unrelated trivia note, because I do like to watch black and white game shows on YouTube, Miss Roosevelt appeared on an episode of the classic show What's My Line, which is where you have a panelist and a person with some weird job or something, and you have to ask questions, and they get 10 chances to see if they guess right. Anyways, she was the mystery celebrity guest on an episode which aired in on October 18th, 1953. The host, John Charles Daly, answered the questions for her because her voice was, quote, so well known. The panel still guessed it in 5 tries. You can find that episode on YouTube, and just seeing her laugh made her even more personable.
I absolutely loved it when you sent me that one night, and it really does show her humanness, and she's
Yeah,
just so down to earth. It's
she really
awesome.
was.
Check it out, you'll love it. And Eleanor was treated with respect absolutely everywhere she went because she dang well deserved it, right? Sips for hardworking women that don't hide behind a man or the patriarchy.
Cheers for that one.
That's
Uh,
right.
and finally, Eleanor is the last First Lady to have a vessel named in her and FDR's honor. The USS Roosevelt is a Navy missile destroyer that was built in the late 1990s in little old Pascagoula, Mississippi. What is there to say about the woman that has to follow Eleanor Roosevelt? That's some big shoes to fill.
Indeed. But enter an Elizabeth Virginia Wallace, known to us as Bess. She was born in Independence, Missouri, and her story with Harry S. Truman honestly feels like something out of a novel. They met as children. This is just so cute. They were around 5 or 6 years old and they were in Sunday school. And Harry later said it was basically love at first sight, which is kind of adorable and also a little intense for a 6-year old.
Yeah, who even thinks like that at age 6? Times like then were really different, but that would have made a really fun scrapbook.
Absolutely.
They grew up together, shared classes through school, and eventually began courting. But it wasn't a quick romance. Their relationship stretched over 9 years and was partly interrupted by World War I before they finally married.
That is a very long courtship, but such a sweet story. I'm sure they told that story over and over again to their family for years to come. Now, Bess Truman is very different from Eleanor Roosevelt, right, Emily?
Completely different energy shift.
Correct. She valued privacy, disliked the spotlight, and never really enjoyed public life. But She still took the role of First Lady seriously. She just approached it on her own terms,
Grit.
which honestly feels kind of refreshing after Eleanor's very public, very outward facing style.
She limited press access, avoided unnecessary appearances, and protected her family fiercely. She especially guarded her daughter Margaret, who I learn I'm currently reading Dick Van Dyke's autobiography. She used to be an opera singer, and once she was booked on the Ed Sullivan Show. It happened to be the same night that Dick Van Dyke was looking to get his big break on that same Ed Sullivan Show. But she went first, and I mean, being the president's daughter, Ed Sullivan was like, "Sure, keep singing," and she's really not known for being a wonderful opera singer. But, yeah, so she interrupted Dick Van Dyke's big break, and like Eleanor Roosevelt, she too appeared on that game show, What's My Line? But they also guessed her. And then there's the historical moment she steps into. When Harry S. Truman becomes president in 1945, it's immediate and intense. He takes office after the death of Franklin D. Roosevelt, right at the end of World War II, which was the very beginning of what became known as the Cold War,
Yeah, so they were literally thrown into such a precarious situation.
right?
And while Bess isn't out there giving speeches or pushing policy, she's quietly holding down the personal side of the presidency during one of the most high pressure transitions in modern history.
Her role wasn't just about visibility, it was about providing stability for the country. And speaking of stability, the Truman family lived across the street from the White House in Blair House from November of 48 to March of 1952. The literal roof of the White House second floor was sagging a couple feet, and wall structures were deemed inadequate. Do you imagine if, like, a tub just dropped into the Oval Office?
No, but that sounds like it could have very well happened.
The renovation cost over 5.7 million, which is about 53 mil in today's money, and President Truman said, "With all the trouble and worry, it is worth it, but not at $5.5 million." And at least he noticed that's a lot of money.
Right. But you could look at it as, maintaining that icon of America might help morale in that times. But back to Bess, she was stealthy and less public. And I think that's what makes her interesting. Even her husband called her his chief advisor and full partner. She didn't try to redefine the role like Eleanor. She didn't try to charm the public like Grace. She simply said, "This is who I am, and this is how I'm going to do this."
And she stuck to it, and I need to do a better job of that as well. After they left the White House, they returned to Independence, Missouri, and Bess lived a long and quiet life. She ultimately became one of the longest living first ladies, passing away at the age of 97.
Wow, longevity was on her side, which feels very fitting. She spent most of her life avoiding the spotlight and somehow still became a steady presence in one of the most pivotal moments in American history.
Huge. And the next lady is huge because she's in my top 3. I just adore this woman. Mamie Eisenhower defined what people picture when they think of a 1950s first lady and housewife in general, and she was the last first lady to be born in the 19th century.
Wow. So picture it: pink dresses, perfectly set tables, and a White House that felt like it came straight out of a magazine spread.
I would kill for my house to look like this right
Right?
now. Mamie was known for her signature color, which became known as Mamie Pink, in a style that was elegant, approachable, and very intentional. Her pink inauguration dress and her little haircut with the little bitty bangs are definitely my favorite amongst the first ladies. But that polished image, it was not accidental.
Mamie understood presentation. She knew Americans were watching and she leaned into that role. She embraced being a hostess, planned events with precision, and made the White House feel welcoming during a time when the country really valued stability and tradition.
That's right. She made it feel relatable to other women in the country. She shared recipes and decorating ideas. She let everyday Americans feel like they had a glimpse into presidential life, but honestly, it sounds like every housewife's life, you know?
Exactly. And she seemed to be like the early version of a lifestyle influencer, if you think about it.
It really does. So, sips for starting a movement.
That's right.
But there's also more depth to her story. She married Dwight D. Eisenhower when he was still a young Army officer, and her life became one of constant movement. Military bases, long separations, and uncertainty. They moved around 27 times over 35 years. And being a military wife myself, she had to fit the part, especially, I mean, the higher up your spouse gets, the more you're expected to act like a lady, a proper wife. And you have to act professional and respectable at all times. Tips for military wives, moving stress. I myself have moved 6 or 7 times in over 15 years, and I really couldn't imagine doing it all over the world like she did.
I know, because that's even you're moving, that's like moving every 2 years,
Yeah.
half the time you're packing up boxes and heading to the next state. So she did that too. She grew up comfortably with household help, but obviously armed forces life is quite different. There was no personal staff or lots of discretionary income. She managed to look like $1,000,000 while entertaining on a budget. She carried a certain frugality throughout her life. She wasn't raised for politics, but she did adapt to it over the decades.
But unfortunately, she also endured real loss. Their first son died at just 3 years old from scarlet fever, which you never hear of anymore. And that was a tragedy that deeply shaped her.
Yeah, that's so sad. That's another easily treatable thing these days. Under all of that polish was a delicate piece of glass.
By the time the Eisenhowers reached the White House, Mamie had spent years navigating public life behind the scenes, so she was able to step into the role with confidence. She wasn't trying to change the position, but she was perfecting it with ease. And I quote, "Why, this comes naturally. I've been training for it for 36 years. When you're in the Army, you get used to chasing after your husband. Same, Mamie, same."
Yep, you understand. And the public really loved Mamie for this. She became one of the most popular first ladies of her time, someone people felt that they knew. I can guarantee that military spouses loved her. And
Mhm.
I certainly admire her after I've learned all of this, which is powerful in its own way, because not every first lady leads through policy or activism. Some also shape culture, expectations, and how the presidency is experienced at home.
And Mamie did all of that and more.
She did. She made the White House feel warm and sophisticated and just a little bit aspirational.
I mean, Mamie went from army wife to hosting the queen. The Eisenhowers were the first couple that Elizabeth met after she became queen in the 1950s. So I'd say this first lady really knew her way around event planning and came equipped with a heck of a lot of poise. Love her, love her. But now comes one of the most iconic first ladies in American history.
And who is my personal favorite first lady, that would be Jacqueline Kennedy. And she was only 31 years old when she stepped into the role.
Which is wild, that's younger than we are right now.
Don't tell anybody our age, right?
Right?
Truly, she was so young, and from the moment she arrived, she didn't just live in the White House, but she transformed it. Before that, before her White House tenure, she was born into money. Therefore, she was expected to marry well, and marry well she did as she married into the Kennedy dynasty.
Jacqueline was deeply committed to restoring the White House as a historical and cultural space. She wanted to bring back authentic furnishings, researched original designs, and emphasized preserving it as part of American history and not just a resident.
And then she brings that vision straight to the public.
Yes, the first televised White House tour in 1962, over 50 million people watched, which at the time was basically everyone in America. And she won an honorary Emmy for it, which is just incredible. Fun story, Jackie also hosted the Mona Lisa, yes, the one that lives in the Louvre in Paris. She was able to get them to loan it to America, and it was, I think, flown on a plane in its own seat, to Washington, DC, and was able, for the public to come see it, which is so cool.
That is amazing. I mean, and it never came back to the United States again, I don't think. I love how she wanted to bring the arts to people, and that's important. Behind all that elegance, unfortunately, the fashion, the poise, the fairy tale image, her life was marked by real tragedy long before Dallas.
Right? Her husband, JFK, had some serious health issues, including chronic back problems, probably from his war days. And this led to daily lunch pool parties and multiple surgeries. Not to mention all of his not so secret female dalliances, which, according to a couple of books I read, all that activity helped ease his intense headaches.
Right. I know. I read that one about, Mamie,
Women
his
offered,
yeah, his side piece, Mamie, and that's how she met him, was she started working
she
at the
did.
White House, and they invited her to one of the lunchtime pool parties, and that's where it all started.
You get a chance to read Mimi's autobiography, go because it is so good.
Yeah, I read it in, like, 2 days, and I probably could have read it in 1 had I had the time, but yeah, you'll love it. Just a few months before the assassination, Jackie gives birth to their 3rd child, Patrick, who dies just 2 days later.
And it was terrible. Geez. Her and JFK were really torn up. So by November 1963, she had already been grieving that loss.
And then comes that day, November 22nd, 1963. She's sitting beside JFK in the motorcade in Dallas when he is shot. In the chaos, she climbs onto the back of the car, later believed to be reaching for a piece of JFK's skull,
And when she's asked about it later, she doesn't remember doing it.
which honestly tells you everything about shock and instinct in a moment like that. She stays with JFK at the hospital. She stays with him after he's pronounced dead. And then this part always gets me. She refuses to change out of her blood-stained pink suit.
That's crazy. That dress, I think, is still locked away. I think it keeps getting extended, and I think now it's until 2099. Because let's face it, people would flock to see that.
They
But anyways,
definitely would.
she famously said, when they got back on Air Force One, "I'm not changing. Let them see what they've done."
And that's what she does. She stands there beside Lyndon B. Johnson on Air Force One as he's sworn in, still wearing that pink suit. Most of us have seen the famous photo of that moment, and the emotions are felt even all these years later.
For real. But
Ugh.
Jackie didn't just endure that history. She helped shape how we remember it. Just days after the assassination, she invites journalist Theodore H. White to interview her.
And during that interview, she compares JFK's presidency to the musical Camelot.
She shares a line President Kennedy loved. "Don't let it be forgot that once there was a spot for one brief shining moment that was known as Camelot."
And from that moment on, the Kennedy presidency became Camelot.
Which is extraordinary because that was not accidental. That was intentional narrative building. She turned grief into legacy and was like her own PR department.
Yeah. Jackie Kennedy did not just live through one of the most tragic moments in American history. Rather, she made sure it would be remembered in a certain way.
And it for sure was one of the most iconic things, unfortunately, from that funeral. My mom still talks about it, little John saluting his dad's grave.
I
It's
know, it's so
eerie.
sad. It makes you wanna tear up just talking about it, just to put yourself in that moment. So,
Exactly. And I
Jackie
mean,
went through it.
she did, and like Eleanor, who would wanna follow that, kinda hard to fill Jackie's shoes.
Right.
That first miscarriage, and then Patrick died. That poor lady.
Yeah, she went through it for sure.
But the lady that followed her happened to be Claudia Johnson, best known as Lady Bird, And Lady Bird is often remembered for flowers and highways, but she was so much more.
So Lady Bird basically ran her husband's early campaigns. She managed his Senate office when LBJ signed up for war after Pearl Harbor. She controlled media narratives. Lady Bird was a journalist before marriage, after all, and she spearheaded the beautification movement that reshaped how Americans experience public space. All the while putting up with Congressman turned President Lyndon Baines Johnson and the fact that he liked to wave his pecker around and ask people if they had seen anything bigger.
One of my
Wow.
favorite stories ever. A friend and I, hey Kim, just went to his presidential library, and I was just telling her all the random stuff I read. And it's just so funny because the videos they present in the museum talk about how he's this bigger than life person. And you can see the videos of him standing in people's faces because one, he was tall, and that was how he was exerting his power over people. So I can totally see him asking other men at the urinal, "Hey, have you seen this? Anything so big?" You know,
So
because men get off on that stuff.
right, so ridiculous. And in that book about JFK's girlfriend Mamie, JFK told her to stay away from LBJ. So I don't she didn't go into detail about why he said what he said, but he had some issues.
But when we talk about beautification in regards to Lady Bird, we don't mean just planting a few flowers or how pretty a sausage is. She was instrumental in passing the Highway Beautification Act of 1965, which limited billboards in the area. She cleaned up junkyards and preserved natural landscapes along Americans' highways. They're from Texas, by the way. So wildflowers are huge, huge here, especially in Austin. Like literally, they are all over Austin. So she had a hand in that. She was the first lady to publicly lobby Congress for the projects that led to this act. She also started the National Wildflower Center, which is now the Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center in Austin. She was also awarded the Highway Beautification Award, which goes to an outstanding Texas district every year, and she paid for this out of her own pocket.
That's just how important it was to her, right? Yeah, when we go to Austin, we need to check this out. And
We are.
it yeah, definitely. And this is it's all wild when you think about it because that's the America we still drive through today. The idea that the country should actually be visually cared for. That would be all Ladybird.
But she didn't stop there. She pushed for urban renewal in DC. She planted trees, restored parks, and advocated for cleaner, more livable cities. She believed beauty wasn't frivolous. If it was tied to mental health, pride, community, health in general, it was for the better.
Yeah, because if things look nicer, I think people just automatically take pride in where they live, and maybe it'll help encourage them to keep their own gardens neat, you
And
never know. So I have to pause here for a second, because my sister-in-law actually calls me Ladybird, and honestly, I get it. I love nature, I love birds, and I'm out there feeding them like it's my personal responsibility. I'm no joke. I have become that person that I'm ready to actually set up a camera to record my sweet little cardinals out there.
oh, you
So,
have cardinals?
oh yes, I have a pair, and I kid you not, I have a mommy and daddy, a little boy and girl. And when I walk outside, they I guess by now they know that I feed them, and they'll start coming and they don't get too close, but they're like, "Hey, yeah, we're getting our food today." So Ladybird feels a little personal for me.
Well, that's my grandma visiting you, and if you guys who are listening have not figured out, Elizabeth and I do not live near each other. We are in 2 separate states, and I have not seen her little piece of heaven yet, but I know a lot of people think birds are visiting you, and also, those I've seen the cameras with hummingbirds. So cool, so you definitely need to do that.
I do. I have a hummingbird feeder right outside my back door, and when I sit
Mhm.
at my kitchen table and have my blinds open, I can see them come in, and I mean, I'll be in the middle of a conversation with my husband, and I'm like, "Oh, wait, there's a hummingbird." Pause,
That's
all this nature.
So that basically makes Lady Bird Johnson, like, your soulmate.
She is. She's definitely my soulmate. And if I ever start lobbying for better landscaping in my neighborhood, just know I am fully committed to the role. And also, side note, I know this is ridiculous, but I'm giving out little packets of seeds at Meet the Teacher Night this year because I just
You should help
that
spread the love, hopefully get people
yeah,
involved. Oh,
exactly. So I got them ordered from Amazon coming in today. So yes, love me some Ladybird.
awesome. You are so committed. And speaking of commitment, Lady Bird wasn't just about flowers. Before LBJ became president, she bought a struggling radio station in Austin, KTBC, and turned it into a broadcasting success. Remember, she was a journalist.
That's right. So, quiet business mogul energy. She helped build their financial foundation while also shaping his political career. That's not background, guys. That is infrastructure.
And then in November 22 of 1963, her and LBJ are in that car right behind JFK when he's assassinated.
Lady Bird later writes in her diary, and I quote, "There was a sharp, loud report, a shot, then another." Her account is one of the most immediate and chilling records we have of that day. And Jackie's pink Chanel suit will never be on public display, but both LBJ and Lady Bird's outfits from that day are on display in the library.
I'm telling you, if you ever get the chance to go to this library in Austin, do it. Within hours, Lady Bird is standing beside Jackie Kennedy on Air Force One as LBJ is sworn in. She watched like real history pivot in real time.
And yet, despite all of that, she rarely centered herself, even when her impact was undeniable. For instance, when LBJ ran for the presidency in 1964, Lady Bird took a solo train ride lasting 4 days, all the way from Virginia to Louisiana, promoting her husband. Who needs to pay for a commercial when your wife is literally out there doing the work, right?
And not to mention that LBJ was a known philanderer. She was even kind to those lucky ladies. Maybe because she wanted to save face, or maybe it was because she knew what they had to endure. LBJ would ask other men over a urinal, like I said, if they had ever seen anything as big. In fact, poor Lady Bird visited her gynecologist after her honeymoon to make sure she didn't have internal injuries.
Ouch. Poor thing.
I know, right? But then there's this moment in 1968 that literally says everything. After signing a series of conservation and beautification laws, LBJ presents Lady Bird with 50 pens, the ones he used to sign the bills, and a plaque.
And the plaque reads, quote, "To Lady Bird, who has inspired me and millions of Americans to try to preserve our land and beautify our nation. With love from Lyndon."
I love when a husband recognizes his wife. And so this is not subtle. That's a president saying, this was her vision,
Yeah,
not mine.
I absolutely love that. And that's what makes her so fascinating. She didn't just support power, Lady Bird shaped what that power valued.
But she was also shrewd and intentional. The kind of woman who didn't need the spotlight to change what people saw, but she, quote, realized she had a pulpit and could use it. And she could use it to do good.
That's right, quiet power, the kind that plants something and trust it will grow long after you're gone. And so not only did she literally plant or get wildflowers planted, she
Planted real seeds for
yeah,
the future.
metaphorically planted seed long after.
Then almost on the other side of the spectrum, I hate to say that, we arrive at Miss Nixon.
Yes, Pat Nixon. She was a first lady who is so often remembered only through the lens of Watergate, but her story is much bigger than that.
Born Thelma Catherine Ryan, nicknamed Pat because she was born the day before St. Patrick's Day, and her life was defined early on by hard work and independence. Pat lost both of her parents at a young age and essentially supported herself, working multiple jobs just to put herself through college.
Which that in itself already sets her apart because this wasn't someone who was born into privilege, which is unlike Jackie Kennedy, but rather Pat Nixon built her life from the ground up.
and that definitely shapes a person. So after marrying Richard Nixon, she stepped into political life, but she never fully embraced the spotlight. But she did manage to remain composed and stoic through the loss of the 1960 presidential election, and again when Nixon lost the governorship of California.
She was more reserved, more private, but incredibly dedicated. Pat never wanted to be first lady, but she paid her dues. Quoting her directly, she said, "It takes heart to be in political life." And one of the ways she made her mark was through travel.
My favorite, Pat visited more countries than any first lady before her, serving almost like an unofficial diplomat. Most importantly, she accompanied Tricky Dick to China in 1972. He was the first president to ever visit the People's Republic of China, helping with trade negotiations and thus ending a 23-year stalemate of no relation with China at all. Then in 1973, she became the first lady to enter a combat zone, which was in Vietnam.
Yeah, that's pretty impressive. And what's also impressive is, again, just thinking that all of Pat's travels were not just ceremonial visits. It was not just to get good pictures of the president and first lady in these other countries. She actually went to places that were politically sensitive at the time, representing the United States with a kind of quiet steadiness.
She also promoted volunteerism and community service, encouraging Americans to get involved in their own communities.
Right, which feels very lead from where you are. We all can make a
Exactly.
difference.
Honestly, I don't remember reading any of that in the books because, of course, her time as First Lady becomes defined by one of the most infamous political scandals in American history, a big scandal in basically anything, and it's Watergate.
Correct. And in 1974, Watergate leads to Richard Nixon's resignation, making him the only president in the United States to step down from office.
And through it all, every headline, every investigation, every moment of public shame and scrutiny,
Pat Nixon stands beside her man.
there's this image of her near the end. She was quiet, composed, but clearly carrying the weight of everything happening around her. The press even dubbed her Plastic Pat because she kept a smile plastered on her face. You never knew when paparazzi will strike, and people today kind of need to remember that. She definitely endured high highs, but honestly, I think she had mostly low moments. Imagine if she went around frowning all the time. The press would have eaten her alive, but I bet the comments would have been way worse.
Oh, totally. I mean, it's just a reminder to always watch your face. Fix your face.
I'm so guilty of.
Same.
I got that
Yeah.
RPS, like, I'll get out.
Yeah, I know. I should stand in front of the mirror and have certain obnoxious things playing so that I can, practice keeping my face in a
Oh,
proper way.
right.
Um, but Pat Nixon once said, "I never thought of myself as first lady," and I think that tells you everything because she didn't seek the role, but she fulfilled it with loyalty and resilience.
And with that moment, the presidency changes.
Trust in government shifts, the media's role shifts, and public expectations all shift.
We fully have entered the modern political era. And with that, it is time for our love letters. Florence Harding, thank you for reinvention. Florence rewrote her life on her own terms again and again and refused to be defined by where she started. And then Grace Coolidge, thank you for your warmth. You brought light, kindness, and human connection to the White House, even in the shadow of profound loss.
Then we have Lou Hoover. Thank you for being a trailblazer. She explored the world, expanded opportunities for women, and quietly challenged expectations long before it was the norm. Then, following Lou, we have Eleanor Roosevelt. Thank you for your defiance. Eleanor refused to stay in the role she was given, politically, personally, and publicly, and instead rewrote it on her own terms.
Bess Truman, thank you for being steadfast. You stayed true to yourself in a role that constantly demanded more, and you never let the pressure change who you were. Then my favorite, thank you, Mamie Eisenhower, for that influential charm. You made elegance feel effortless. You turned hosting into an art form, and you proved that influence does not always have to be loud to be unforgettable.
And here are some of my favorites. First off, Jackie Kennedy. Thank you so much for being a myth maker. In the face of unimaginable loss, she transformed grief into a legend and ensured one brief shining moment would never be forgotten. Following Jackie, we have Lady Bird Johnson. Thank you so much for your cultivation. Lady Bird planted ideas, spaces, and beauty that continue to grow long after her time in the spotlight.
Finally, Pat Nixon, thank you for your endurance. You stood quietly through scandal storm, unshaken in public, even as everything around you unraveled. All in all, these women were no longer just hostesses. They were shaping culture, politics, and public memory.
Yep. We're still talking about them today in 2026. Now, our pop culture corner. The books and films out there on these iconic first ladies are almost endless, but here's a shout out to one that I remember well about my favorite first lady, and that is Roma Downey. The actress Roma Downey from Touched by an Angel played Jackie Kennedy in the 1991 NBC miniseries called A Woman Named Jackie. And fun fact, Sarah Michelle Gellar from Buffy the Vampire Slayer played the teenage Jackie in that movie. So look it
I'm
up.
gonna
I think you'll love it.
have to go watch that because I love me a good biopic. And then for some juicy biographical reads, we already had mentioned Mimi's Alfred book, but it is titled Once Upon a Secret and it was published in 2011. And then my favorite, I've read it twice, is called Sex with Presidents by Eleanor Herman from 2020. And it covers a lot of presidents, but also touches on Eleanor Roosevelt and Hick.
That's right.
But you can see all of our bibliography on our socials.
You can email us at the end of the segment. I'll give everybody our email address. So send in your questions. Next episode, we will move into the modern First Lady era,
From Betty Ford to Melania Trump.
which means topics like feminisms, media scrutiny, and some very outspoken First Ladies.
So that's a wrap. Thanks for listening to Love Letters to History.
Where history is the past.
And the press is our present to you. Cheers!
We did it. This has been Love Letters to History with Emily and Liz. Have a question, a favorite historical figure, or an episode idea? We'd love to hear from you. Email us at loveletterstohistory@yahoo.com. Also, follow us on social media for behind-the-scenes stories and upcoming episodes. Until next time, history is the past, and the past is our present to you. Cheers!
We draw the lines of history, scenes to the stories that last forever. Love letters to history. We remember eternally.